Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball. We've had the absolute privilege of chatting with some amazing Canadian as well as international guests over the past year. While the topics have been broad in range, whether clinical, social, or political, our aims for the podcast continue to remain the same. We hope to inspire discussion, creativity, scholarly research, and career development in all Canadian surgeons. We hope you enjoy our second season as we continue to highlight some incredible guests, deliver detailed masterclass sessions on a myriad of clinical topics, and introduce some fresh new features such as debate and companion formats. We hope you relish the podcast as much as we do.
We were lucky enough at the end of June 2021 to interview a true Canadian surgical icon, Dr. Liane Feldman. Dr. Feldman is the chief of the Division of General Surgery at McGill University in Montreal and the newest president of the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons, or SAGES. We really wanted to try to understand from Dr. Feldman, what does it mean to be a minimally invasive surgeon in 2021? Where does Dr. Feldman see SAGES going in the future? And finally, we discussed the work Dr. Feldman did to help create the Fundamental Use of Surgical Energy, or FUSE program. The FUSE program is now a core part of North American surgery programs and helps residents to understand the actual underlying physics and mechanics of surgical energy devices. In other words, what exactly is the difference between blue and yellow in the bovie? For all this and more, stay with us.
The first question I have for you is, do you think the Canadians are going to win the playoffs?
Absolutely. You have to have faith, thing like that. There's definitely, it seems, and last night notwithstanding, seems like there's something magical happening for sure.
Yeah, I mean, keep the price is right and keep calm and carry on, right? We're all rooting for them. Dr. Feldman, you're a Montreal native, is that correct?
Yep, that's right. Born and bred, or my mom's from here as well, and my dad was originally from Toronto, but I was born here and raised here. This is home.
And did you do medical school and residency in Montreal as well?
Yeah, I'm pretty much a lifer. I did go away for my undergraduate degree. I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, so about just a little bit 6-hour drive or so south of Montreal, for 4 years as an undergraduate. And then it was always my dream to come back to McGill, come home, and I've basically been at McGill ever since.
Right on. And you're now currently in McGill, and you're the chief of surgery there, and recently now the president of SAGES. And there's so many different things that we could talk about, but one of the things that we really wanted to chat with you up front and congratulate you on, obviously, first of all, is your election as the president of SAGES. And so I just wanted to start off by asking you, how did you become interested in running for the position of being the SAGES president?
SAGES, to me, I always just really connected with SAGES as a community of surgeons and an organization. I first, I was trained by Jerry Freed. He was also my predecessor as chair of our department here. And I was actually his fellow in minimally invasive surgery. And he took me to my first SAGES meeting where we presented, I think I had a little poster. In those days you had to type in maybe not type it in, but try to print it out in the square. And we had a poster, it was in San Antonio. And maybe it was just getting to spend time with Jerry and his amazing wife, Karen, that was really fun as well. But I just really found a community of people interested in the same things that I was interested in, but also really, really started to connect with other people at my stage, people that were interested in the same stuff. You could connect with people that you've read their stuff, you've read their books, and SAGES, I just love it's a really down to earth organization. Really, really focused on young people, I felt, and I still feel lots of opportunities for young people And so that was just, and also just, it's an organization that has a lot of fun. Definitely, I don't know if have you been to SAGES yet?
I haven't had the chance to go to SAGES specifically, but yeah, you totally get the flavor of that. SAGES is like a fun
Yeah,
event to go to.
right. So I would definitely, of course, I'm a bit biased, but as president, my meeting will be in Denver in March in 2022, and I really hope you can come. And then the meeting in 2023 will actually be in Montreal, and it's the first time it'll be in Canada. So I hope we can attract a lot of Canadians also who are interested in GI surgery, improving recovery for patients, minimally invasive surgery techniques, technologies, and just also fun organization. And definitely, I won't give away all of SAGE's fun things, but like there is the sing off. It is a bit, it's pretty well known, but I hope you can come.
Yeah, it's definitely on my list of meetings to attend once we can actually go back to in-person meetings. It's just such an exciting prospect on the horizon to be able to go to these meetings again in person and meet everyone. I kind of you mentioned that you had gone with your mentor Gerald Fried, who's obviously a huge name in Canada and beyond in terms of minimally invasive surgery. How did you yourself get involved or interested in minimally invasive surgery? Clearly, you were a pioneer, and I should mention for our listeners that you're really someone who has pushed minimally invasive surgery here in Canada and really helped to bring that and expand that across the country. So how did you yourself kind of get interested when at a time when probably not that many people were doing minimally invasive surgery?
Well, I think it's probably like a lot of people, what you get into. A lot of it had to do with role models, and Jerry was always Jerry Fried was always a mentor to me and a role model for various reasons, and he was certainly well known pioneer in minimally invasive surgery, and when I started my surgical residency, it was 1993. And the first lap choles in Canada were only done in mid 1990. So it was really a time of rapid development and innovation. But to me, I'm not really like a gearhead. I'm not like so for me, it wasn't so much about the stuff. For me, it was a lot about just the patients just look so much better. And it's a very, very obvious thing. And I was always interested, I don't know why, but I was always interested in kind of proving that patients were recovering faster. And actually that's has been my bit of my research interest ever since I was a trainee. So a lot of it I think is just seeing the impact on the patients. And a lot of it was following in the footsteps of somebody who I thought was a good role model. And I thought I thought it looked like they had a good life and were happy in surgery and excited about surgery. And that was one of the things about Jerry, is that he really loved to operate and he really loved to be in the OR and be with patients, and he seemed happy. So I think that was probably a reason, something to emulate as a trainee, and I think that's something that really rubs off on people.
Yeah, it's you can't really underestimate how powerful that mentor's impact on you. And I kind of like the fact that you chose to become, a guru of MIS because you liked what impact it had on patients. A lot of surgeons talk about the fact that they kind of like the tools, or they're kind of interested in the technology aspect of it and all that. And I'm kind of like you, I want the tool that will be the best for the thing that we need to do, right? As opposed to being the advocate for the tool. Because sometimes that's not the right tool for that particular patient or for that particular condition. And this sort of relates to the one of the questions we were going to ask you about SAGES. SAGES stands for the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons. And on first glance, it's kind of hard to figure out what unites that group of people. Is it, especially now that it's not even just about laparoscopy anymore, there's robotics, there's transanal surgery. Obviously I'm a colorectal fellow, I'm going to bring transanal surgery into it somehow, but there's all these kind of disparate technologies now, and perhaps some things have not proven even the test of time for minimally invasive surgery. So how do you sort of see SAGES as encompassing all those kind of different folds, or do you see SAGES as really a society dedicated to figuring out more minimally invasive ways that we can do surgery? Like, how do you sort of think about that as an organization?
Well, I think SAGES is a general gastrointestinal surgery organization. So I think there's an evolution that we could discuss of why it's called gastrointestinal and endoscopic surgeons. But I think the key thing is, for me, the sweet spot for SAGES is about the intersection between innovative new often they're new, but innovative, less invasive technologies that improve recovery for patients. And at the same time, the education that's required to go with that. And I think that's where SAGES really took off. Just to get into the history a little bit, SAGES was begun by the surgeons, about 40 years ago, who were interested in endoscopy, colonoscopy. So that's where the endoscopic surgeons came from. And when laparoscopy came on the horizon in 1989, 1990, they were the same group that kind of immediately grasped. And maybe it's because they were doing image-based, they were in that kind of image-based world as GI surgeons, and they immediately grasped the meaning of it. And they were very early adopters. And a lot of them became, even in colorectal, in upper GI, in bariatrics, became those kind of pioneers in those areas. And they're in that kind of, and I would say, in my generation is more the people that were taught by those pioneers. And so that's a little bit of why it's called, and it actually was called gastrointestinal endoscopic surgeons, but to broaden the appeal to broaden to the house of surgery that's really in gastrointestinal surgery, that and was actually added, and not that long ago, within the last 10 years or so.
That's some neat history that I actually didn't realize. And it's almost like, having not been there and only having a very recent kind of insight into SAGES, it's almost more about like a mindset as opposed to anything else. It's like a mindset of how do we advance care and how do we innovate and how do we make things better, as opposed to just, being about the latest tools or the latest toys.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And if you don't know anything about SAGES, I'm very happy that kind of is conveyed. Because at the same time, I think what's important to me in thinking about technology is kind of and I think SAGES is definitely interested in, the next big thing. There's a big focus on technology and being ahead of that curve. And that's really important. So stuff like, computer vision and helping with looking at AI technologies, looking at robotics, as you mentioned. But at the same time, being aware about the humanistic aspects of surgery, the community aspects of surgery, what's important in our careers as surgeons to thrive, not just survive. Last year, we started a new task force called Reimagining the Practice of Surgery. We always have, we call it RPS, but and that really has to do with us as surgeons. What's important to us in our careers to thrive as surgeons professionally, to get the meaning out of our professional lives that drew us to surgery in the first place, that and our the career trajectory. So I think having that community of people, being a surgeon is hard, and in some ways we have a lot of supports if we're lucky, in family and friends, but in some ways it's our colleagues that really understand. And that having around us, having excited about the same things that we're excited about, understand the challenges and the times that things are really don't go well, and that's normal in the life of a surgeon at some point. And I think that's another thing that really drives that you can find in surgical societies, not only SAGES, but I would definitely encourage everybody to get involved in a specialty society or surgical society, whether that's local, a provincial organization, or national, international, to find, because they're your people, the people that are interested in the stuff that you're interested in, the people that get you, and having that opportunity to travel. And I've really made close friends through my work at SAGES, and other people have the same, whatever organization they are drawn to. So I think there's so many aspects of, there's so many things to do in setting up your career, but I think that's one thing that I feel very lucky that I was able to get involved deeply in a surgical society.
Yeah, I think I've told this story before on the podcast, but when I was doing my master's, one of the residents from Calgary came to Brigham and Women's to do an elective, and I met up with her while she was there. And I think it's like the closest experience I'll ever have to meeting up with like a veteran, like two veterans meeting from a war. Like that's what it felt like, it felt like two veterans, and the way that we just kind of caught up on things that had happened in the past and things that were going on. It really did feel like, this was like it's more than just like a colleague. It's like someone that you've really gone to the front lines with. I feel so delighted when you kind of have this as one of your visions for SAGES. What are the other things that you sort of think about when you're now as the president of SAGES, in terms of your vision for the organization going forward?
Well, it's such a huge privilege to have that platform that people that will listen to you for some reason. And I think, I've thought a lot about how to try to make the most of my opportunity. For sure, I mean, serving in the roles that lead up to presidency for the last several years on the executive committee, and going through the last the pandemic for the last year and a half, and going through the reckoning. It's a North American organization, but it's an American-based organization, and seeing the reckoning that they've gone through with racism and anti-racism efforts. So DEI, anti-racism, I think are very key priorities for this year. I think SAGES, because we like to think of SAGES as an innovative organization, I think we're not new to, I think, to those concepts, but I think they've been brought out in such a striking, emotional way that we will definitely focus in a big way on that this year. That's definitely a very big priority, as for other organizations, and I think SAGES, hopefully will continue to be innovative in that space, and for us, it's just a way to continue to get to be as strong as we can be, to be the most creative, innovative organization that we can be, by making sure that we encourage leadership opportunities within our organization for everybody, and that everybody feels that they belong in our organization. And we obviously, like every organization, we have work to do to understand those pathways and understand if we have potential blind spots. And that's work that we will certainly do in a big way, continue to do this year as well. Actually, the chair of our diversity, we call Diversity Leadership and Professional Development Committee, is Aaliyah Qureshi, who's actually also Canadian. She trained in Toronto. She's now in Boston. So good Canadian content there, but that's definitely a big priority for us this year.
Yeah, it's certainly a thing that I think every organization, journal, institution really needs to think about, what strategy they're going to have in terms of addressing those issues. I noticed that you had tweeted the other day that you were in discussion with the president of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, and I know that those efforts are kind of ongoing. What do you see besides making the leadership opportunities available to everybody? And what are some of the concrete things that you think SAGES can do to try to promote diversity and equity in the organization?
We like you said, there's one thing to commit, and there's things that you need to put into practice. When we a few years ago, we started a task force that became a committee that we called We Are SAGES. That probably was more focused on gender equity within our organization, and we did have to put in. We did, not that we had to, but the process was quite strategic in let's say representation at our meeting, representation speaking opportunities. And maybe in gender, it's the metrics are a little more transparent. So we could without much difficulty say, it's going to be 50% of our speakers are going to be women. When I was the co-chair of the program in 2018, President at the time, Dan Jones, was very fierce on it. And we had conversations where he would ask us as the chairs of the program, and obviously the meeting is a really huge central event for us. So planning the meeting is a big deal. And he would say often, what's the number? We'd say 46%. He's like, not good enough. Get me to 50%. I don't care how you do it. It's 50%. It's 51%. And so I think there are, whether we need to put in those kind of how do we know we're going in the right direction, getting the data and the metrics that we need. And I think a part of SAGES that I got a lot of from SAGES as a committee member, and then a committee co-chair, chair, board member, moving up in the ranks, was really a huge amount of leadership training for me. And that's something that I feel so grateful to SAGES for. It's where I encountered things like strategic planning, budgeting. How do you enact a vision? How do you sell a vision to a group of other surgeons or other colleagues? And so to me, really, this is a part of our leadership development. So it's education for our leadership. It starts with education. And then it's putting policies into, it will likely involve putting some policies and looking at needs of our members through surveys and needs assessments, led by our diversity committee. So I think there's a lot of great people involved with that. And I think that we have to be strategic, thoughtful. We have to keep track. And we have to make sure that our organization represents the House of Surgery, and that our members gain stuff from SAGES that they are able to enact in their own communities. And I think that's one of the big advantages of having opportunities in organizations like SAGES, is that what I learned through the opportunities I was given at SAGES to lead are a huge part of what we bring back to our own organizations, our home base, to enact in leadership, and it builds on itself. So I think that's a key role for SAGES.
Yeah, it's not an easy task. Like, I don't envy anyone who's put it, in the realm or in the role of being the president of a major organization, because it's really a big group of people. And of course, surgeons are not, necessarily they're not pushovers by any means, or natural followers, So you really do have to deal with some people who have very strong opinions on how to do things, and who have a variety of different interests and thoughts and opinions on things. So, I'm curious if there's anything surprising that you've encountered during your first initial bit as in your tenure as SAGES president, in terms of leadership and that type of activity, in terms of thinking about running a big organization like this.
Well, volunteer leaders. So we have an excellent, really outstanding staff, and that's one of the things I also think about. Something like SAGES and other organizations like it are, I think, the main thing is it's almost like any project that you want to do is you think of, the opportunity that you have, and laying out some kind of a vision that's attainable in the time that you have with that opportunity. And I think it's like any project or any role that we play in our everyday life. I mean, surgeons to me are all leaders, and surgeons lead every day in the operating room. And I think we have excellent group of leaders. I'm surprised every day. I'm amazed every day. I'm amazed by the amount of work that people do as volunteers. It's humbling. It's amazing. We've had our virtual board meetings, and the one that we had not very long ago, about a month ago, maybe a little bit more, in the spring, is basically we have 42 committees and task forces at SAGES. And so to hear about the amazing work that's done by our volunteer surgeons, like surgeons are pretty busy, it's amazing. And I'm surprised and just like so proud and in many ways just like, wow, you're doing what? Like every committee is doing amazing things. And so I honestly, I sometimes am surprised. I'm surprised when people are able to put the time in, but I think it's really worth it because you do have that ability to create something in some ways that mirrors what you can do at home, but it's different. So I not that I'm surprised, but I'm proud of it, and it's exciting, and it definitely gives me energy.
That's fantastic. There's some really passionate people out there in the world, and it is really inspiring to see what people do. And that's one of the things that we've learned from doing the podcast. It's amazing the work that you and so many others have done. So it really, really, truly is.
And it's amazing what you're doing.
Oh.
I'm thinking what you're doing and doing the podcast and adding to the journal in that way, bringing something new, something that gives a different perspective. As a volunteer and as a leader, and that's what it's about. Is if you have the opportunity, and we all have that opportunity, big, small, every single day as surgeons in our kind of privileged roles as leaders in our communities, in our institutions, whatever level we're at. I think your example shows you can take something, you have an idea, you're given an opportunity, you run with it, and then you have something that's meaningful and that people learn from, and you've created something new. So that's, you've done great with that as well.
Well, we appreciate that, and we've enjoyed doing it. One of the obviously, we talked before about SAGES, is that SAGES is this innovative kind of organization that is constantly trying to think about the next best technology. How can we take care of patients better in a less invasive way, potentially? And obviously, you've been doing this for a long time now. You were a pioneer of MIS back in the 90s. Where do you see the future of minimally invasive surgery going?
Well, I think I think it's the evolution will continue to be towards this path, less invasive, more personalized, safer. And some of the exciting innovations, I think, in safety will potentially revolve around, computer vision, potentially point of care decision support in the OR, but also in the clinic. So more personalized as we get more into data science potential. None of these things proven to do anything yet, but these are just looking at certain potential. So I think that we're continuing on that path. This is a time of rapid transformation. It's a pretty exciting time to be, in surgery. I think especially starting in surgery, we've seen this kind of rapid transformation, as you said, with the laparoscopy revolution. That's something that completely transformed surgery extremely quickly. And I think we're every 25, 30 years, and maybe data science has the potential to give the next revolution. Advances in robotics and surgical techniques, there might be a role for some of those things to be automated. So I think this is a very exciting time of transformation. More image-based, also education, augmented reality techniques, virtual reality techniques in education are very exciting. How do we learn from video recordings in the OR? So lots of really, I think, exciting stuff in minimally invasive surgery.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. It's also an interesting time. I'm sure you may have seen there was this paper in Annals that reviewed the robotic cholecystectomy experience in New York, and found like a surprising number of like bile duct injuries and increased complications. And so it almost seems like there's this separation happening now in some ways, where lots of surgeons are trying to adopt new technologies and new techniques, maybe with varying outcomes. It's always hard to say what goes on in these type of scenarios. And then you'll have the advocates for whatever their favorite thing is. The robotic colorectal surgeons, to give a colorectal example, we'll just talk about robotic colorectal surgery, and the TATMers, we'll talk about TATME. And so there's all these kind of different camps, and there's all these different technologies and varying levels of expertise with all these different platforms. Do you see SAGES broadly, and perhaps, and you personally, do you have any thoughts about how we can perhaps bridge that variation in care and unify these kind of different camps?
Well, I think it's whenever there's, it's kind of the technology adoption curve. There's extreme enthusiasm when something is new. TATME is a great example. There's going to be a role for it. It enables certain things to be done that probably better than with other techniques. And how do we personalize what's the best? How do we, make sure as surgeons taking care of a specific type of patient with a specific type of disease, that we have the tools in the toolbox to make that as personalized and, have the best outcome for that patient as possible. I think when we bring it back to what's the outcome for the patient, and even through a value lens of, best outcomes that are important to patients divided by the cost as being a definite Michael Porter's definition of value. I think it starts to simplify things a bit. But there'll always be, I think another great framework for evaluation of new technologies is called the IDEAL framework, where we want to encourage, obviously as surgeons, innovation is critical, and it doesn't always follow the path of phase 1, 2, 3 trials. On the other hand, it does need to follow some kind of path, and where we evaluate the role and the effectiveness and the trade-offs for different technologies. And I think that's a really good framework to look at that.
Yeah, and I do think, like personally, that SAGES is going to have a huge role in terms of disseminating the best available techniques and tools and data around all this stuff. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've watched SAGES videos in preparation for an operation, even when I've done it many times before, because I just find it so helpful to look at them.
Me too. Yeah. And I think I'm very happy to hear that, because I think SAGES is one of the things is how do we make that information? I think when we're looking to watch a video to learn to prepare for a technique, and we know that's the number one way trainees and surgeons, what they do, and they're learning, want to even you're doing something you don't do every day, and we want to make sure that you can that the quality of what we're watching is that there's a quality element to it. And I think that if SAGES can give that kind of stamp to people who are watching it, that's exactly what we want. But we want to make it easier for people to find that. So we are embarking on a whole redo of our educational materials at SAGES along, we call our master's program, which is along sort of specialty lines, colorectal, hernia, bariatrics, et cetera. And a new organizational wide learning system, management system, which will also hopefully help with management of the fundamentals programs of FES, FLS, and FUSE, two of which are mandated programs by the American Board of Surgery. So trying to make that information more accessible, easier to find for what you need is definitely also not as exciting as DEI and anti-racism efforts, but making sure that educational materials, because it goes exactly with, a technology, and I think this is one of the things learned in laparoscopy, that A technique that's only doable by a rare few people is not going to be something that changes patient care. And if it's something that's really worthwhile, like laparoscopy, then how we train people to do it is critical in terms of that learning curve and the safety aspects. So they really go hand in hand, new technologies, and it's almost the translational aspect is that surgical education piece. And I think you're right that it's a lot through video.
Yeah, I mean, like even simple things. I think that like having playlists or some things like that on YouTube so that it's easy to find the right video and things like that is going to be super helpful. I mean, I think SAGES, one of the things that's been really cool about SAGES and is so innovative about SAGES is the embrace of social media, Facebook, Twitter. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask, who is the genius bot that runs the SAGES Twitter account? That the SAGES Twitter, far and away, no question, is the best organization's social media profile on earth. Like how did that happen? Who does that? Tell me a little bit about who
Nobody
who
knows.
runs that.
Nobody knows who exactly does it. We all have our suspicions. I will convey your compliments. But yes, that's I agree. It's great.
But there must be some level of like that SAGES agreed to kind of go down this path, because it's totally different than a normal or a traditional Twitter account. It's not. It's deliberately, the voice is not like super starchy and uptight. It's very like, it engages in a different way with the audience, and like lots of non-surgeons follow SAGES because of that reason. So like, what was the thinking around that, or like what was it really? Who had the courage to let the Twitter account and the social media kind of presence go in that direction?
Well, I think that's just how SAGES is. I mean, I think that's one of that's one of the values is we want to be exciting and we want to be relevant, and we want to engage lots of different types of people. And we want it to be kind of fun also at the same time, and not take it too seriously. So I think that's the mix that I think is what we're happy to have.
I want to switch gears here a little bit, Dr. Feldman, and ask you about your experience as the James IV traveling fellow. I think about a decade ago, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm curious what prompted you to apply for that fellowship. Obviously it's a prestigious honor and something we watch very closely in Canada. And I'm curious what your experience was like traveling through that time.
Yeah, like you said, it's a big honor, and you actually, it's not really much of an application. You're kind of brought forth as nominated by the people at James IV, and I've become one of those people that sits around the table that usually we meet at the Canadian Surgery Forum, or we meet virtually. And nominees are brought forward from the various, departments of surgery. And there's some amazing, Canadian surgeons. I think it's a great opportunity at that tipping point where, maybe at the tipping point between associate and full professor, where making those kind of international connections are important. So it's also, when I went, I had kids who I could travel with, but the youngest, I think, was 6 or 7. So you're right, it's about 10 years ago. He's 18, the youngest. We had 3 kids, and there's sort of a bit of a trail for James IV, because it's great to visit other places that are James IV, involved in James IV themselves, and then a mix of other places as well. So, we got to go to bring the whole family to Australia, New Zealand. So that was a huge adventure for us at the time, and it's a great mix of work and play. And they still talk about it. Kids, like, the trips you take, family trips you take, are and even for me, and maybe for you guys too, like what you remember as a kid are those trips. My parents didn't take me to Australia, but even road trip, driving down to Florida or something, you definitely remember those. So it's a great opportunity for Canadian surgeons.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's such a prestigious honor. You're right, and it's a small club, and it's a list of some really amazing people. I'm curious both bilaterally. So, how did it change, or maybe alter, or impact your practice when you came back to Canada? And I'm curious. Obviously, these relationships, whether through former fellowships or through, always try and leave some sort of legacy or something behind. And I'm curious on sort of both directions how you experienced those two.
Oh yeah, exactly right. I mean, I think for sure I got more out of it than I think I left behind. But visiting a place like Imperial College in London, a mecca of sort of surgical education, surgical innovation. Meeting with all of, having a whole day of meeting with researchers at different levels, hearing about all their ideas, presenting your own work and getting feedback on that. I also made a point of trying to get to the OR every place that I went, just to see different ways that people do things, and also the same ways that people do things. Rounding with the residents and the team. As a general surgeon, and I always liked, emergency general surgery. So many things are exactly the same wherever you go. Questions are the same. I remember even, when do you guys use cholecystostomy tube? Oh, I hate cholecystostomy tube. Oh, I love cholecystostomy tube. Like the regular stuff that unites us around the world, no matter where. At least in the Western world, in the academic surgery world. It's and you come home with, I had lots of ideas, new collaborations, new friends, and a lot of family memories as well.
One thing that we definitely need to talk about before we let you go is the FUSE program. You co-developed the FUSE program, and this has become obviously an integral part of training for residents, particularly in North America. Can you talk about what the FUSE program is and how and why you developed it?
Yeah, so FUSE, it stands for Fundamental Use of Surgical Energy. It's one of those things. It's a program that was developed by SAGES, an educational program, to teach surgeons some of the basic information that underlines the safe use of energy devices that we use every day in the operating room. It's the didactics are free. Anybody can go through them, and it's stuff that we generally don't cover in our residence programs or training programs, or we've had industry come in and there's nothing inherently necessarily wrong with that, but I think it's such an important safety issue. We've all had safety issue that we should understand the devices that we use, that all have huge benefits. We couldn't do surgery without them, and certainly we couldn't do minimally invasive surgery without some of these devices. But that we should own the training of those devices and understand the safety issues. And really, that's what FUSE is about.
Well, it's an amazing program, and it's interesting to reflect, right? Because when we teach trainees about some of these devices, certain things like, say, certain energy instruments, for example, are quite intuitive to use, but there is nuance to all of it, whether it's using a stapler or whether it's using a negative vacuum suction dressing. There's tons of nuance, and quite honestly, the companies aren't great communicators at teaching that nuance. I find, I don't know what your experience is, and then the flip side of it is, as well, there is variability from place to place, and I don't think everyone reads the engineering, manual that comes with a lot of these devices. So it's so critical, hey?
Yeah, it's. I mean, you can just ask yourself: do you know what the basic technology? How does that device that you have in your hand work? And I know as trainees, you may it's not just for, I mean, all of us as surgeons, I suspect many of us would have trouble explaining the difference between ultrasonic, bipolar, cut, coag, blend. Maybe there's a bit more education on that in our nursing colleagues. How do you handle an OR fire, a disaster event that can happen that has that we should, we need to be aware of and drill down on. And these are things they happen, and they have devastating consequences. I think most of us have been involved in complications of energy devices. Surveys have shown that most surgeons, if not from themselves, have sort of 1 degree of freedom away from 1 degree of separation away from either a colleague or a case that they dealt with an enterotomy that develops, or a bowel situation that develops a week later. We've all been involved in those cases. So I think I was not an expert in energy in any way. I was brought into it as probably because of my work in education. And that's how I got onto the team. And so I really had a full education about it, and needs a refresher once in a while. But I think I'm happy to have the opportunity to promote the program and encourage it. Also, for people that want the actual certification, there is a certification exam that can be done. But for everybody else, as I mentioned, the didactics are free. You can do CME. There are CME questions built into it, and I'm glad you guys like it.
One thing that comes up every single time someone does the fuse, like I remember doing this as a resident. Every resident that I've seen after taking the fuse course, they always come back to their staff and they're like, the fuse course said that I should use cut when dissecting, not coag, and I never see you use cut. And they're like, well, that's true, but I still use coag. And I still remember that one of the surgeons in Red Deer would always use cut, and I was kind of shocked when he did that. And then I went away and did the fuse course, and I realized that, at least according to the physics, that seems like the right thing to do. Can you explain for our listeners why should you use the cut function when dissecting and not coag?
Yeah, I mean, so you have to go to the fuse, but basically when you use coag, you at the same power setting, to keep the power set. So what you press, 25, 30, if you say, where are my where's my Bovie settings? You're going to say, I have 35. So that's the power, the watts that are generated. So at the same, if you go back to our physics class, at the same power, the thing about the coag is it's an interrupted waveform. So it's only actually generating current, maybe, in the fuse, it says about 6% of the time. So in order to maintain the same power, you have to really jump up the voltage if you're only on 6% of the time versus the continuous waveform that you have with cut. And I think that, every generator is a little different. And it is one case where you want to look at what the manufacturer is recommending. Oftentimes we'll recommend the blend function, which is not cut and coag put together. It's a modification of cut so that it's a little bit of interrupted waveform, but not as so let's say it's on 80% of the time, 50% of the time, and you will have different tissue effects. And it's a great thing to do for academic half day or something to do with a piece of meat in the simulation center, where you can really play around with that stuff. And the thing about the continuous waveform is you can understand it's going to give you a stronger, more effective seal when you're coapting the vessel walls versus that kind of welding that you could have on, it's on for 6% of the time and then off, on, off, on, off. And you get that sticking and caramelization that pulls off your seal. But it is very good for fulguration, or that surface coagulation on the gallbladder bed. And so I think there is an art to electrosurgery, and there's some very basic concepts that are not that can be easily taught and remembered, that help us with that art of different tissue effects with when you use the tip of the hook or when you use the heel of the hook, that we all kind of recognize, but it kind of explains why. And it also goes through some of the safety issues. So if you have let's say, an implantable device like a pacemaker, if you're pushing up the voltage to get that tissue effect, you definitely have more interference with those devices and so forth. So I think it's stuff that we use every day that we're responsible for really understanding a bit.
I was hoping that we could end with a question you may know we ask almost all of our guests, which is that if you could go back in time and visit yourself either as a surgical trainee and or maybe a junior staff surgeon, what advice would you like to give yourself in hindsight?
I think advice to my younger self is just to take it easy on myself. As a resident, I think it's to that everybody learns to operate. I think just somebody did tell me that, and it helped at the time. I didn't believe it, but it turns out to be almost entirely true.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you've liked what you've been listening to, please leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear your comments and feedback, so feel free to email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com or connect with us on Twitter @CanJSurge. Thanks again.